Whenever you rent or buy a video, you need to be sure that the film you choose is suitable for the audience at home.
Do sit down. We're just about to have some tea.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do not panic, but scream. Scream for your lives.
Hail weirdos, the kettle's boiled. Welcome to Tea for Terror, where we take a favourite horror film and dissect it over a nice cuppa. I'm your host, Andrew Graves, and my guest today asks, when will we go back to the gods of our childhood?
Hello, Andy.
Hey, Darrell Buxton, how you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Yeah. I've had my cuppa already, but I'll join you in a metaphorical one. So
I've got my Frankenstein mug today.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you again. Fifth time,
always great. Always great to do
yeah.
the show. Yeah.
Bye. I think possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we've done the decades thing, haven't we? So we do a different. So we've done 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So yeah, this is the fifth time. Then we're on to the 60s now. So yeah, fifth time on, which is great.
I think there's you, possibly James Whittington, that have been on equal amounts of times.
Yeah,
but it's nice. It's really nice, actually. It's lovely. I mean, obviously, it's lovely to see you, but it's nice to have. I don't know. I didn't quite know what I was envisaging when I first did this podcast. I thought I'd be lucky to scramble about and get anybody to come on, and it's just been lovely because not only have I had really nice people on, some really good people. It's nice to have returning guests as well, like yourself, and like people like Barbie Wild have been on a few times now, and Tim Dry's threatening to come back on again. And it's nice to I surprise myself by, I send out emails and messages occasionally thinking they're never going to get back. They're never going to talk to me. And then they do, which is really nice. So, yeah, so we had, for those that are not aware, we recently had Richard Stanley on talking about King Kong, which was just a bit surreal, really, because I've always really liked Richard Stanley's stuff. And, and to have him basically sitting there talking about his favorite film and certainly one of my favorite films, Caan, it's great. It's a good old chat about that.
Fantastic.
So yeah, it's lovely to see you again, Darrell. So what's happening? We belong. So those that don't know, and why wouldn't you? But Darrell is the editor of long-running horror magazine We Belong Dead, so which I contribute as me and many other writers contribute to regularly. But so what's new in the world of We Belong Dead?
Well, just about an hour before coming on the air with you, we've finished the brand new issue 44. So all the files have gone off, all the artwork's gone off to be looked at by the designer Steve Kirkham. So hopefully within a couple of weeks or so, we'll have a brand new issue for everyone. So, and it's featuring a new column or sort of ongoing series by this young talented writer called Andrew Graves, who's going to be looking at what he calls a fear in England. So if you want to find out more about what all that's about, you already know, Andy, but listeners can buy our magazine and see exactly what the fear in England is all about. But also I've been working again, as I do sort of on and off, for my pals at Treasured Films, and I actually visited the West Midlands just a week or two ago. Saw the guys down there, Graham and Tom, and we went off on a very, very exciting trip, which we're going to announce details of very soon. So if you're into your sort of weekend horror festivals and horror events, look out for news of one that's coming this summer, and I wish I could tell you more, but it's under wraps at the moment. We've seen a venue which looks amazing, and the guest list that I have seen and the names that are coming up so far are sensational. And as I say, that's all I can tell you. So look out for news soon.
Lovely. Yeah, I need to check out some more treasured film stuff, I think. But yeah, so and also I think we have spoke about it on this podcast before, but I do think, I'm not just saying this because I contribute to the magazine occasionally, but I do think We Belong Dead. For those who don't know, I mean, We Belong Dead, if you're into horror, particularly classic horror, but any kind of form of horror, I will say, it's a really good inroad, and it has so many contributors. It's not like kind of like a closed little community. I mean, it is a community in a way, but it's kind of like not closed. It has a lot of different contributors, and like I guess the horror world and its kind of fans, oft but often has that kind of thing where it's men of a certain age, I think. But I think with We Belong Dead, this definitely is that. But I think there are lots of different contributors, lots of younger people, female contributors, all sorts of contributors. And I think it's a really good mixed bag of voices and opinions on some classic and not so classic horror. So yeah, and I think, Darrell, obviously he's here. I don't want to embarrass him, but yeah, I mean, Darrell and Eric before do a really good job with the editing and the choice of kind of topics and sort of themes that are covered in magazines in various specials or whatever. So I've always, I write for various magazines, which is, usually it's always a positive experience. But yeah, I can say hand on heart, We Belong Dead is a great thing to be a small part of, really. So yeah, check it out. If you've never checked out We Belong Dead, you should check out the We Belong Dead, the magazine, specials, and the occasional books they do, because it's just quality stuff. And if you're into, especially if you're into that classic horror, it will be right up. It's not only will it be right up your street, it will be parked outside your house, and Darrell will be knocking on your door.
That's right. That's right. Very nice of you to be so complimentary, Andy. And the new issue, just as an example of what we do, we've got loads of female contributors this time, as we often do. We've got some great female writers, which just gives an extra flavour and an extra voice to the mag. And one of our writers, Karen Joan Kahutek from the States, has written a marvelous piece on Dario Argento's Trauma, which doesn't focus on the film so much as it focuses on the address of the house which is featured in the movie. And there's some very, very interesting stuff, because Karen, I think, lives or did live close to the house, and she says all this in the article. And it's a look at the location and the history of the location. So it's an interesting little take on that. We've got a 19-year-old writer in this issue. Benjamin Kurt Unsworth makes his debut for us with a terrific piece. It's a piece on Psycho, but it's a piece on Psycho like you have never read before, and that's all I'm going to say. He makes an interesting comparison with another classic of American art, and you'll have to buy the mag to find out what that is. We've also got a great piece by Paul P.D. Donaldson, who does his own rival podcast, of course. And Paul has covered the history of the most dangerous game on film and all the various sort of spin-offs and so on. And as a sign of what we do at We Belong Dead that you don't get in other horror magazines, we've got a massive feature by Stephen West on, wait for it, Bing Crosby.
Yeah, well, his son was famously in Friday the 13th, wasn't he?
Indeed, yeah, and his granddaughter Denise has got a lot of genre credits too. But you'd be surprised at Bing's horror connections. So again, if you've never thought of Bing Crosby as being anything to do with horror film, get the mag and find out.
Well, because Ari Lehman, he was in Friday the 13th. Obviously, he's the first, quite famously the first Jason. He came on this podcast, and he's a lovely, lovely chap, and he's got this band called First Jason, which he kind of
Yeah,
tours around the country with. But
I saw them in a movie at Horror on Sea last week. They were in this film called Lust and Witchcraft, I think it was called, and
Sounds about right.
he
Yeah.
he played the devil in the movie, and his band actually perform in the film. So yeah, I'm sort of well up to scratch with first Jason.
Well, I interviewed it. Well, he was on the podcast, but I interviewed him as well for Scream magazine,
Yeah,
and so I was asking him about Crosby's son in that, and he had nothing but complimentary stuff to say, and he said he just kind of sat there, because he's only a young lad when he was in that, so he was kind of enthralled by these Hollywood stories and stuff because he sat around by so yeah, it is an interesting connection. I don't think Bing was particularly a good person, shall we say?
no,
I
no. Well, it depends who you believe. I
yeah.
think either that or he's a Joan Crawford style victim of a sort of vengeful offspring. And you never know which side to believe in these cases, do you? But
I
we'll
mean, I know he made films in a different period, in different times, shall we
yeah,
say.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, I think that, as broad-minded as I am, whenever I think about Bing Crosby, I just can't get the image of him as a blacked up Lincoln Santa
yeah,
out
yeah.
of my brain. It's just like, what? The words, what were they thinking?
As you say, different times.
Oh, anyway. Okay, so we're going to introduce the film we're going to be looking at in a little bit. But this film is probably one of the first example. I mean, there have been these kind of films since Hollywood began, but in terms of it being a proper sort of subgenre, I think the film we're going to be looking at is one of the first and one of the best home invasion films because it's so unusual in that we'll get to it, but it's not just about home invasion. It's about the real world, the real America kind of seeping into your living room and how that transpires. But I think home invasion is an interesting topic, and I think oddly actually, not long back I did some work for Second Sight. They recently did a box set release of Your Next. So I kind of did an essay in that, which was obviously looking at Your Next, but it was looking more specifically at the home invasion sort of subgenre and sort of films around that sort of area. So obviously there's a whole plethora of them, but I think very few of them get it right. And I think the best ones are the ones that tends to stick in your head. So obviously things like Funny Games would be one of the most deliberately cruel and horrible versions of the home invasion. Spoilers, folks. If you've never seen either version of Funny Games, there are two versions. There's the original German and there's an American sort of shot by shot remake, if you like. And they're both brilliant. They're both worth watching. But yeah, don't expect any happy endings. Yeah. So
Well,
what?
one of those cases where even the remake was made by the same director, Michael
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Haneke,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and anyone who's familiar with his films in general will know you're not going to be in for a good time either time, are you?
Yeah. Uh, it is. They're both. I mean, people. I know people criticised him for doing it, sort of a remake of the America. But I loved the idea of him remaking it for America as well, and
Yeah,
because it is. He
going
did,
Hollywood with it.
yeah, yeah, but he didn't pull any punches though, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I really do love. I sincerely love both versions,
sure.
but they are. Yeah, they're incredibly difficult to watch, but worth watching. You know, I mean, famously in the original version, one of the criminals who invade this poor family's home, we've kind of just sat through like an hour of kind of pointless violence, which was very deliberately put in there by the director. And one of the main the two perpetrators, one of them simply looks straight into the camera and winks at us, and it is brilliant. It's such a shocking, horrible but brilliant film. Both versions are, but the original particularly is
Yeah.
fantastic, I think.
I think it's a rare case, Funny Games, of not only do the characters break the fourth wall, but they actually go further in at least one scene. They do some extraordinary stuff, which is actually beyond breaking the fourth wall. It's playing with the very conventions of what cinema is.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, because if a lot of time breaking the fourth wall, it's this idea of they tell us things directly or acknowledge us, but in he, like you said, he takes it a step further because essentially the wink and things like that, it's like you are part of this. You
Yeah,
are,
yeah,
you think you're not part of this. It's
yeah.
very much that idea that
And then they're even manipulating the film itself at times, and it's absolutely extraordinary what Haneke and his characters get away with here.
yeah, and I think it's very much, Hitchcock obviously talked about it beforehand, this idea, particularly, well, I mean, when he was doing sort of Frenzy, that his sort of response to the rise of the kind of more violent horror film, is to do Frenzy. And it's kind of like the ultra violence version of Psycho in a way. And it's
Yeah, yeah,
and it's that, but also he's not letting you off the hook either. He's like saying, "Well, you wanted this, so here you go, and you're part of this now. You are as much a part of this as me. You can't place me in judgment if what you want is this.
sure.
It's the kind of tabloid thing, isn't it? It's almost like, tabloids, quite rightly bemoan the idea of children being abused or attacked, but they love a paedophile story. It's kind of
Yeah, yeah.
it's you want your cake and eat it, and I think that's what Hitchcock was giving them, and certainly that's what Michael Haneke was giving people.
And I guess Frenzy came out at a time when our cinemas were flooded with sort of European imports, and we got a lot of the early Giallo films coming over. And
Yeah,
Hitchcock goes out and makes one in competition.
yeah,
Very, very sort of strong Euro horror feel, I think, to Frenzy.
yeah. I mean, if we, just going back to sort of home invasion stuff. I mean, I think. Another really good example is it's going to TV rather than cinema. There's an episode of talking about Alfred Hitchcock. There's an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, where it's basically it's John Cassavetes, and he plays an escaped convict, and there is a housewife on her own, and he literally just forces his way into the house. And again, I don't spoil it, nothing happens to the housewife, but obviously we don't know that to the end.
Yeah,
But to say this was like the late 50s going out on prime time TV, it's really strong stuff. We don't see anything explicitly, but there is this overwhelming tension of us thinking she is definitely going to be raped.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and John Cassavetes is, I mean, obviously people know him for his kind of he's a director, but I just think he's a brilliant screen presence. He's such a creepy bastard. He's such
yeah.
an
I think
intense.
there are certain actors I think that are good fit for home invasion movies. I mean, even if you think in comedy terms, there's that episode of the Sykes show where Eric Sykes and Patty Jake's house is
Yes.
invaded by Peter Sellers,
Yeah,
playing
yeah.
an escaped convict,
Well,
and
also the Steptoe as well. The
yeah, yeah,
Desperate Hours is
yeah, yeah.
amazing.
Well,
With
which is even named after one of the classic early
yes,
one of the films that precedes the movie that we're talking about today, Desperate Hours from the mid 50s with the Bogart and Frederick March. So yeah, the Steptoe show sort of lifted the title directly from a classic home invasion movie.
that
But yeah,
episode,
I think
of Steptoe is just. I mean,
yeah,
I love Steptoe Son. I love Galton
yeah,
Simpson. but I would hold that episode. That episode, I don't care what anybody says. That is an actual that could be performed in theatre. It's just a brilliant play. It's
Yeah,
funny, but it's perfect. It tells you everything you need to know about that father and son in less than half an hour,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's hilarious, but the saddest, most tragic thing you're ever going to see. I mean, the funny thing, obviously, the funny thing is that you've got these two desperate criminals who are on the run from the scrubs, and the first house they come across to try and steal a car or steal some money and be on their way is the Steptoe house. And of course, Steptoes have got fuck all.
yeah.
They're just,
We know, and we as the audience know what they don't.
I think Harold's got 3 pence in his pocket.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah. Listen to some, go watch some Steptoe Kids. Yeah, yeah. Any other examples of like home invasion stuff? Because I mentioned Your Next, which is a fairly recent kind of version of that, which I thought was pretty good and it had some good twists, you know.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, about the home invasion movie is that it's developed. That I think the film that we're going to talk about in a moment is the one that really kick-started
Yeah,
the subgenre as a horror subgenre, because there'd been movies prior to that. We mentioned The Desperate Hours from the 50s. Um, there was a film called Suddenly with Frank Sinatra, where Sinatra and his
yes,
gang
yeah, yeah,
take over a house because they're going to shoot the president, whose train is going to come directly past this house, and so they invade it in order to set up the assassination attempt. And this stuff goes right back to the early part of the 20th century, because there's a play by Andre Delord called Au Telephone, which was written in 1901 and then was filmed several times before 1910. There's a film called Terrible Anguish. There was a film called The Narrow Escape. And there was a D.W. Griffith version of it in 1909, which was called The Lonely Villa. And Griffith's sort of take on the plot of the Delord play makes it sound almost like Panic Room from 100 years later. The home invaders invade this house, but the family have got like a secret room that they can sort of hide in, and so the invaders then try and get into that room as well. And so yeah, you've got these very very early examples. I think the Griffith film actually still exists. It's 12 minutes long, and I think you can maybe find it on Wikipedia or YouTube or other places online. But then we come more up to date and more recently, and as I say, it's become a sort of horror thing in recent decades. We've got stuff like House at the Edge of the Park from Diodato, Death Weekend, the Brenda Vaccaro starring movie from the 70s. One of my favourite little batches of films are there's the movie Death Game, made in the
yes,
mid 70s, which
yeah,
was re-released on Blu-ray last year by Grindhouse, and there have been 5 versions of that, because on that disc you also get a version called Little Miss Innocent, which is a sort of softcore porn version, and that was actually made before Death Game, but based on roughly on the same script or early notes that had been seen. And so they actually did the porno rip-off before they did the real movie. And it was then remade in Spain as Vicious and Nude with Jack Taylor, which is a great version with the marvelous Jack Taylor, brilliant Euro horror version. There was then a hardcore version in the 80s, also called Little Miss Innocence, based on that same original script. And then, of course, more recently, we've had the remake Knock Knock with Eli Roth directing Keanu Reeves. So yeah, there've been 5 versions of the same source material, and it's one of the best home invasion movies because it adds a sort of sexy twist to it. It's these two gorgeous young women who sort of turn up and knock on the door, and of course the male character lets them in, and things sort of progress as you think they're going to. And it's not until all of that has happened that he suddenly realizes that he's put himself in a home invasion scenario. So it's quite an interesting take on the material. I think it's not menacing from the start. The menace sort of creeps in as the film goes along. So I think that's a really interesting sort of take on the whole sort of subgenre, like a little spin-off of the spin-off, if you like.
Yeah, well, I think there are different angles, different ways of doing. I mean, obviously, even though it's not a complete home invasion film, it's probably got one of the most explicit and horrible home invasions in cinema is A Clockwork Orange, obviously,
Yeah, yeah.
but also I think there are different ways that people have spun it off and done it in slight, because I would argue something like Black Christmas. I mean,
Yeah,
and I
yeah, yeah.
think that
There's the thing. It doesn't need to be the whole movie. A
yeah,
lot of the best home invasion movies do take the story from beginning to end, but it's something you can slot into a film as a scene or two or a little subplot.
but I think with Black Christmas, I think what's really interesting in that is that you do get this kind of physical invasion, obviously, but it plays on the fact that the telephone, you're talking about the early 70s. Okay, telephones have been around for a while, but a lot of
Yeah,
people
and
didn't
that
necessarily
goes
have them
right.
in their homes,
Yeah,
and
and it
then
goes right
it's
back to
there.
goes right back to the Andre Delord source in
Yes.
1901.
Yeah,
His
yeah.
play is called At the Telephone.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, there's a British movie called Great Ecstasy of Robert Carmichael as well with Danny Dyer, which is for 90% of its running time, it's a sort of drug dealing story, and a sort of addiction story. And then in the last 15 minutes, turns into one of the most vicious home invasion movies that you'll ever see. Very, very controversial. I think it got booed off screen at some festivals. I think it may have played at Caan, I think, or one of the big European festivals, and actually got howls of protest in the last 10 or 15 minutes because you were getting this conventional gritty sort of British take on a sort of drug movie, and then suddenly it turns into this incredibly violent um, uh, sort of home invasion and rape film, and I think all the audiences at the festivals just couldn't take the sudden shift in tone.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess as well, again, going back to television, Brimstone and Treacle. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
it's not someone necessarily forcing their way in, but
yeah,
it's someone who gets in by using their own prejudices
yeah,
against them,
yeah,
and it's a
yeah.
really interesting, it's
And
horrible.
again, adds a supernatural angle
Yeah,
there as
yeah,
well,
exactly.
if you like, depending on how you read it. So
Yes. Okay. Well, I think we'll introduce the film then. So we are going to be looking at Lady in a Cage from 1964, directed by Walter Grauman.
I'm Olivia de Havilland. You see me in these pleasant surroundings, safe, secure. But am I really? Are you? There's a side of life we tend to ignore, the world of humans so callous, so degraded they are worse than animals. My new picture, Lady in a Cage, explores that world. It's a strong picture with a terrifying theme which affects us all. That's why I urge adult, responsible people to see Lady in a Cage. You will be shocked, you will be terrified, and fascinated. So I caution you, do not see it alone. See Lady in a Cage with somebody you can hold on to for dear life.
So, Darrell, when did you first come across this film?
well, again, I think you often ask me that question, Andy, when I'm on the show, and the answer's often the same. With especially with the more obscure films. I have a feeling this was another one in the legendary pile of videotapes that used to be sort of thrown on the floor at the Gothic Film Society meetings in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s that I would attend, and yeah, you'd get there and there'd be people like Kim Newman and Stephen Jones there, and a lot of my mates sat on the front row, Paul Cockgrove and so on, and everyone would have a carrier bag or hold all with them, and they'd pile out these piles of tapes, and you'd have little mounds of VHF cassettes, and everyone would dive in and sort of borrow from each other. And I'm sure that Lady in a Cage was one that I saw on VHS in that way, because it was a very hard film to see for a long time. It actually got banned in Britain. Texas Chainsaw Massacre style in 1964. It was submitted to the BBFC,
Yes.
and they said
They
unsuitable
refused
for
it a certificate.
yeah. But then, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it did get a London X. If you buy the Blu-ray that came out from in the States about 3 years ago, there's a gallery on there that includes shots from the film and posters and things. But they do have a card for a London X certificate for it. So, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 12 years later, it got released in London. As a local council decision, overturning what the BBFC had said. But here's a movie that stars Olivia de Havilland, Oscar-winning actress, sister of Joan Fontaine, part of this great acting dynasty, worked with all the great directors in Hollywood, and suddenly here we are in 1963, 64, and horror movies at the time are taking a turn because we've got people like Herschel Gordon Lewis coming through, and we've got the early gore movies like The Flesh Eaters and things like that happening. And suddenly, Olivia de Havilland comes along and says, "Look, hold my beer, whatever you guys at the Grindhouse are doing, I'm here at Paramount Pictures, and we're going to offer something that is every bit as grueling as what you guys in the drive-ins are doing."
Well, she got a lot of stick, didn't she? I mean, critically for doing this, and and then she followed it up with Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and again, it's another one of those things where now, I mean, I suppose a kind of modern equivalent, if you like, it is The Substance, Demi Moore. I mean, it's kind of worked in Demi Moore's favor, I think. But yeah, I think a lot of people couldn't handle that this one-time sex symbol Hollywood style actress, was doing this kind of nasty exploitation horror film. And I think it would, even though Lady in a Cage is not, it's not exploitation horror in the same way that Herschel Gordon Lewis was doing. It certainly does. It does not hold any punches. It's a really
not at all, not at all
reading of America. I mean, again, is there a film as prescient as this one, given what's happening now? I mean, I love the fact that it's. I mean, we'll get into it, but I think that. I mean, 1964, in terms of American films, yes, you had a lot of the kind of hangover from the 50s, and there was still some kind of nice and sort of those kind of flowery films that you were getting at that point. And, all those kind of films that, Tarantino has constantly commented on about the 50s. You're still getting some of that at the early 60s, but there were this kind of swathe of films that were coming along, and particularly in 64. I mean, interesting, this is the same year that you have Sam Fuller doing The Naked Kiss, which is just, that's a brilliant companion piece to this film, I think.
Oh yeah, it is. Andrew, don't you think that this is a case of, people always say this about decades, the 1970s didn't start on January the 1st, 1970. No. Decades don't work like that, And isn't it the case that here we've got the Beatles have just broken through in sort of October 63. Kennedy's then been shot in November 63. And the times they are changing, to coin a phrase, And so, this crop of films in 1964, be they at the low budget, sort of something weird end of the market, or be they this big glossy thing from Paramount Pictures that we're going to talk about, are marking a genuine shift. And so could you say, the 1960s were born in late 1963? And I really think there's a case for that. And when you look certainly at the cinema, I think that's very applicable. And in the case of this film, it's an absolute game changer. To set the tone for Lady in a Cage, I think one of the first things to say about it is that is there a single is there a single redeeming character in the entire movie, right down to the smallest bit part, when you've got sort of rubberneckers looking in and trying to sort of peek in as to what's happening, or when you get scenes outside the house, at sort of pawn shops and things like that, every single character in the movie, be they on screen for half of the film as Olivia is, she's on screen for almost all of the movie. But even characters that pop in for one scene or even just a few seconds, they're all horrible. Every single one.
Yeah, it's just
Including Olivia. She's dreadful in the film.
but
Her character's appalling,
yeah. I mean, we'll get into that in a second, because, but I think that, in more general terms, it is. I think there was something about those mid-60s films, particularly the one, things like Naked Kiss, which came out the same year, Strange Love, which came out the same year, Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, Failsafe, all of these kind of like, there were these. I mean, the key is, I think it's before, now I guess in America, most people have got air conditioning, but it was kind of that time where before people had really kicked in and everybody's got air conditioning. I mean, they make a big thing of the air conditioning lady in a cage, but a lot
Yeah.
of those films from that era, they feel about as hot. Nobody does hot and sweaty like
Mm.
those films. It's that
Oh,
black and
yes.
white
Yeah.
monochrome. You can see everybody's wearing hats, everybody's smoking. You can see the drips of sweat. It's that feeling of that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
these kind of mid-60s um, pot boilers that are riddled with social commentary.
Yeah. And I think that's one reason why this stuff works in the Grindhouse and it works at Paramount Pictures, because if you're making a film on short end, or making something that's going to be shown in drive-in cinemas or on 42nd Street, and your film stock is absolutely terrible, I think that suits this sort of oppressive atmosphere. But also, if you're making a film at Columbia, at Warner Brothers, at Paramount, at Universal, and you've got the best black and white film stock that money can buy, that really captures those beads of sweat as well, I think. And the glistening sweat on a famous actor is just as effective as watching a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie that's been run through the projector about 10 million times, And I think this whole thing that you're talking about, let's call it sort of pre-air conditioning cinema, I think that fits the Grindhouse and it fits the hardtop cinemas just as well.
I mean, I saw this a long time ago. I couldn't, I'd kind of had distant memories of seeing this, but couldn't quite remember whether I had seen it. But obviously, I rewatched it recently for this, yesterday, in fact. And yeah, the first thing that strikes you is that brilliant migraine-inducing montage at the beginning. These kind of scat, it's how you got the kind of soul bass style sort of, opening credits. You've got this kind of punching jazz music. You've got
Yeah,
this free form collection of images, and it is just, it's not, there's no easy way into this film. It is literally saying, yeah, here is America, here is hell on earth. Get on with it.
absolutely, absolutely. What I love about the setting of the story is that Olivia de Havilland, who was 47 years old at the time, and I think she's probably playing slightly older in the film, because this isn't quite a hagsploitation movie in the sense of whatever happened to Baby Jane, but it's in that ballpark of, look, the only way, if you're an actress over 45, the only way you were going to get work in the early 60s is to demean yourself in something like this, But I think the setting is great because this character has Olivia de Havilland's taste. She's living in what may have once been a fairly sort of aspirational, sort of well-to-do part of town. And when you see outside, it's clearly become very run down, and there are a lot of sort of ne'er-do-wells and sort of beaten up characters and vagrants and stuff in the area, and there's traffic sort of driving up and down the road at great speed, and it's obviously become a sort of more rundown area, but she's clearly been living there for years and has still got this little haven, within the walls of her apartment. There's still this haven of like old America and good taste. And I think that clash between the two, what's within the walls and what's outside, and the fact that we've got characters that are breaking that barrier down, is the really, really fascinating thing about the film. That idea of that sort of conflict going on, and it's represented by bricks and mortar.
Yeah, because it in some ways it doesn't quite make sense, and I guess that's the point they're making. You've
Yeah,
got,
yeah,
like you said, you've got you imagine, like, you just alluded to there, this house. Clearly this was part of, there would have been a few houses there. It would have been an exclusive part of town. You'd have had none of this trash this encroaching on it now. And it's almost like these houses were built, and she is clearly an old school snob. She
yeah,
doesn't, she's inherited this money, we presume, from her dead husband. She's got nothing in her life other than this money. She's got no particular moral qualms. She talks about reinvesting in the arms trade without, oh well, it's such a nasty, but if she's going to make a book, she's going to do that. They don't present us with any, even though she's the protagonist and she's the victim in inverted commas, we feel practically nothing for her.
yeah. Put it this way. We mentioned John F. Kennedy. I don't think this character voted for him, did she? I think.
No. I mean, well, certainly. I mean, I don't want to get into JFK, but JFK was, it's a bit of a myth. It's kind of like a bit of nonsense. This idea that he was like so progressive is absolute bollocks. He was one of the he came from a really right wing, horrible
Oh
family.
yeah, yeah.
You
But
know,
I'm guessing this character,
but what
though,
he kind of
you,
represented, yes, certainly she
yeah,
would have very
yeah,
much against that. She
yeah,
would have certainly been more of a Nixon
yeah.
gal, I guess.
Oh yeah, but this idea of the areas becoming run down, it's sort of anti, what we call gentrification. People
Yeah,
talk about London and talk about areas like Notting Hill
yeah, 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 yeah.
were really, really run down, and now houses go for 5 million or whatever. But I think we are still seeing the reverse. If not in London, I think certainly in other British towns and cities. I think there are these areas that were once very well to do and are now becoming slightly more run down and are attracting, if you want to use the term, undesirable elements and so on. So I think it works both ways. And I think this film is an early example of showing that. And again, it's all about change in America, which I think is the overriding sort of, if not the theme of this film, it's the overriding sort of subtext of it.
Yeah, and she has a, I mean, that's the thing. She has absolutely no idea of what's really happening, and
No, no,
or she
no.
has an idea. She has an idea what's happening, but it's not based on reality. It's
Yeah,
based
and
on
she doesn't need to have either, because
no.
her entire existence has been this cosseted lifestyle. And even if the area around her has become run down, she doesn't notice because she's got a sort of chintzy little house, and she's got a liquor cabinet, and she's got a wine cellar, and she's got all her little trinkets and ornaments around her. And she's a disabled character as well, which becomes important to the plot. This is where the cage of the title comes in, and so maybe hasn't always necessarily got the means to go out. So she's got this enclosed little world that is nothing to do with the environment that is immediately outside the walls of the place where she lives. And
Yeah,
so, as you say, she simply does not understand, does she?
no, and the fact that she is trapped in this little elevator, this quite literally a gilded cage.
Oh yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
she's stuck there.
Yeah, and again,
She,
what a metaphor that is.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think she's got an elevator in her house. Well, it's there because she's disabled. But how many disabled people in the early '60s in America would have had something like that in their house. Probably not many, and probably only people on the sort of social strata that she's on. And so the fact that it breaks down, I think, is an indication that, hey, things aren't right in America. If you take this interior, the interior of this house as a sort of metaphor for America, suddenly things start going wrong, but she has not got a clue what is coming next.
Yeah, and she learns nothing from her situation at
No,
all.
no,
I
no.
mean, other than towards the end, obviously she realizes that her son doesn't give a fuck about her, and he's out of
Yeah,
there, and she's completely on her own. And but the idea that she's being confronted by this criminal in the cage, and he's essentially he has the power. He can do whatever he wants. He could
yeah,
rape
yeah,
her. He could kill her. He
yeah.
could strangle her.
Well,
Whatever.
there's and
And
he
she
brings along.
and her what? How does she try and get out of that situation? She refers to him as an animal.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just that's not going to endear you to this person. This person's clearly going to cause you some harm. And
Not at all. But then again, that tells you that she has never, ever, ever, ever even had to confront or speak to a person like that before. She doesn't deal in
no, I mean
the lower classes.
no, and she just refers to them all as this kind of she refers to him as an animal, but she refers to everybody from that particular class or lower class or whatever as these kind of you're the people who've been burning up my taxes. You are the burden
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
state, and
You
without
do,
actually
you do.
realizing,
Yeah,
she
you do
I
sense that me and you would probably get that treatment from her.
well
The postman or
I
whoever
had
goes, the milkman probably gets called that. And
I remember growing up, and I remember doing certain jobs and me being the lowly sort of kid who was with his arse hanging out his trousers or whatever. And it's just often you'd be in offices or whatever, wherever you're working, and there'd be like these upper middle class women, and you talk to them, and they just they had this authority, this power.
yeah,
And
yeah,
when as soon as you question them further or you find out a little about them, you understood they had no money. They didn't need to work. Their husband provided all the money, or they'd inherited it, and yet I was a burden.
yeah. So
They they
they've still got they do have, and it still happens today. I think there are people who feel they have this sense of entitlement, and because of that, they think they're better than you, and they can tell you what to do, especially in a working environment. And you ask any office worker, and they'll tell you about their middle management boss, and they're people exactly like this. I think the animal character, of course, is making his film debut
yeah.
is James Caan, and I think he's a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier.
He's
In
channeling his best Brando, isn't he?
Yeah, he is indeed. But
Clearly.
isn't he a perfect actor in that sense of the actors that we named earlier, who is absolutely perfect to play a character like this? To play someone who's very mean, who is unpredictable. You don't know what you're going to get, and terrifyingly, of course, he brings a gang along with him,
Yeah.
and they're all like him. There are three of them, and they're wearing these masks, and this is paving the way for Last House on the
Oh
Left.
yeah, I was just going to say,
Yeah,
just going to
yeah,
say that gang is absolutely the '60s version of the last, because these nihilist lunatics,
yeah, yeah. And
they
this
literally got
isn't.
nothing
Yeah,
left to lose,
yeah.
nothing.
Well, we mentioned earlier, suddenly with Frank Sinatra, we mentioned Desperate Hours with Humphrey Bogart. This is something different. This shifts that type of cinema into horror territory, and it's entirely down to the immorality and the behavior of this gang.
Well, I mean, I was kind of poking fun out of James Caan there for channeling sort of brand. I
Yeah, yeah.
suspect there would have
Well, he
been.
does, yeah.
Well, I'd expect
Well, every
yeah,
young actor
everybody
was that,
was, and I suspect there would have been pressure from, because he does at that age, he had a very he did resemble Brando. So
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
I imagine the studio was like pressuring, make him look like this. He's our
But
Brando.
do you
But
know
I
what,
think,
Andy? I'd love to have seen Brando, a younger Brando, maybe in the mid 50s, in a home invasion movie, playing an intense character like that.
but
And I
you know
think
what
Caan's like the next best thing,
what I was thinking though, and this is completely in Khan's favor, I think, is that I am not sure that Brando would deliver the same level of nastiness.
I
Because I
think you're
think
right. And
whatever you say about Brando, whatever the character was, you could not he could not help but placing some sort of humanity
yeah,
somewhere
yeah,
at the
yeah.
center of it. There is a humanity, even if it's the wild one where he's kind of, you know, what you got to rebel against, what you rebel against, whatever. There's still this hint that there's a spark of humanity in him, and I think that's all the way through with Brando.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I think the thing with Brando's characters is they don't respect everybody, and they often don't respect so-called authority, but they do have a certain respect for some people. Caan, and I think it's good that he's a new actor here, that the audiences wouldn't have known who the hell he was, breaks through all that, and he's completely immoral, and the people he brings in with him are completely immoral, and you dread to think what their backstory is. We never really find out, and you just cannot imagine where these characters might have come from and where they might be going next. And they're passing, what we see is them passing through the life of the Olivia de Havilland character, and we're thinking, where have these guys come from?
well, yeah,
What's their future going to be, and what the hell are we in for in the 90 minutes that we're spending time in their company?
well, I mean, it's kind of as well as obviously James Caan as O'Connell. I mean, you've got Elaine,
Yeah,
which is
played by
brilliant.
Jennifer Billingsley. Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
fantastic, and you can imagine that possibly she's been kicked out of the go-go dancing girl gang from Faster Pussycat Kill Kill
oh
Kill.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
She was a bit too lunatic for them.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they've
yeah.
carted her off.
This is a Paramount movie. It's a big glossy Paramount film, but she's a character right out of the Grindhouse, isn't she?
Well, yeah. I love those kind of grindhouse characters. There's just these kind of insane females who turn up and like just make no fucking sense whatsoever.
Yeah, and they're always
Like,
great. Yeah,
they're brilliant. They're just these kind of part ditzy but psychopath kind of blonde bombshell or whatever. And I
yeah,
think
yeah,
Faster Pussycat Kill 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 is just a brilliant example of that, because it's like, who is this guy? Why
yeah,
why are these bunch of go-go dancers in the desert picking people
yeah,
off? What's
yeah.
happening?
Again, it's like the ganging lady in a cage. You look at Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, and you think, I cannot possibly imagine the backstory of these characters. What are they? And because of that, you're terrified of them, because you simply don't know where they've come from or what they're capable of.
Well, yeah, but this is why these are very much. I mean, they are very much films in their own right. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but they are precursors to what was coming with
Oh, sure,
Last House on
sure.
the Left. Like you
Yeah.
said, because it's that nihilism.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the terrifying thing
yeah,
with something like even Norman Bates. There
yeah,
is
yeah,
there is a reason, but where something like O'Connell, played by Caan, or those characters in Last House on the Left, or even with, Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, it's just there is no reason for this. There's
yeah,
no
yeah,
real reason.
yeah. And this is paving the way not just for the future of horror cinema, but I think for the future of American cinema in general. This is paving the way for Easy Rider.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is that immorality of the characters, and the fact that they just seem to have sprung out of nowhere, that makes it. And we talked earlier about how were the 1960s born at the end of 1963, at the time when this movie was being shot. There's a sense that the 1970s are being born in 1963 as well, because this change is so seismic that it carries on over the next 25 years of American cinema, I think.
Yeah, I think, if you look at something like, say, JFK, by Oliver Stone.
Yeah,
Now, I would argue that is an incredibly entertaining film. It's one of the best cast films, and it has some of the best performances ever. However, politically and it's all over the place.
yeah, yeah,
There is much to talk about in terms of it. It's very anti-queer, anti-gay. It's all of these things. It's still entertaining, but it's kind of that falsehood that people like Oliver Stone, as much as I admire them as filmmakers, it's that falsehood, this idea that everything in America was great up until they killed Kennedy, then it all
yeah,
went to
yeah.
shit. And I don't, that's not the case.
No,
Anybody with a fucking ounce of intelligence can
yeah.
see that's not the case. But
And
I
you
think
can see that. You can see that in the movies. You can see that in the
yeah,
history of
but
American film.
but I think movies became much more honest about what was happening
Yeah,
in America after Kent. It's not that everything suddenly went to shit. It's just that suddenly we were able to be a bit more honest about it and say,
yeah,
actually, this is happening. And it's not all, you know, despite the fact that Kennedy said he was going to end the Cold War in his next, what a load of bollocks that is. It doesn't work that
yeah.
way,
Yeah, but there are undercurrents of that sort of corruption of a country in things like film noir from 25 years earlier,
Exactly.
and
Yeah,
from
yeah.
the 1930s horror films even.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a sense in some of those when you dig in and look at the political side of those strands of cinema, you can see that the writers, especially, I think, are fighting to get this stuff out there, and it's the producers and directors, and maybe the higher echelons of the cast members who are maybe sort of stamping on that a bit and saying, "Oh, you can't say this." And then, as you say, I think in '60s the floodgates open and we get Dennis Hopper.
Yeah, I think the cast in this film. I mean, one of the best, most interesting characters. Again, we have no idea how he got there, and we don't even want to question how he's there. But the character Brady, repent, repent, played by Jeff Corey, who
Yeah, yeah,
Jeff Corey was blacklisted for a number of years, and he even had an uncredited role in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, So,
yeah,
but he did
yeah,
all these
yeah,
he had this long list. He was very prolific, and then he got blacklisted, and work obviously thinned out. Obviously, he did this, but he was doing a lot of kind of teaching, mentoring other actors, and then he kind of got back into stuff in the late 60s and 70s. But yeah, so it shows that, as progressive or as kind of interesting as some of those films were from the mid 60s, like, as I said, Naked Kiss, Strangelove, this film especially, Failsafe, all these kind of really brilliant films that were really tapping into the psyche of the real psyche of American culture, and really illustrating that the American dream was a load of fucking claptrap.
oh yeah, yeah,
And but there was still the overhang. There was still this suspicion, this paranoia, not coming from a good. These films were very cynical, but that's a healthy thing. But in terms of more sort of you right wing thinkers, it was all kind of, they were still there was still this sense of attack and to close down and to stop sort of free thought, all this kind of stuff. So there was this. I think the mid 60s is really interesting because there's just this battle going on,
yeah, yeah,
in a similar way. I mean, it's much more, the lines are much more clearly drawn now, but obviously in America at the minute and in this country to a certain degree, there are these divisions, and it's nonsense, this kind of culture war bullshit. But it's kind of boiling away there. There is, one part, it feels like one part of the country is quickly looking to what's next, and the other part of the country is trying to regress back to what was. And it's somewhere there is this clash in between, and out of that clash, out of that conflict, comes these brilliant films like The Naked Kiss and Strangelove and Lady in a Cage.
yeah, yeah. I think Brady is an interesting character in a sort of small p political sense here and sort of social sense, because in a lot of movies he'd be like the comic relief. He'd be the sort of sympathetic character. And here, I think Walter Grauman and the writers are telling us that don't have sympathy for any of these characters. They're all awful. They're all bastards. So even the sort of fun comic alcoholic, A, is an alcoholic, B, he's a vagrant, and C, although he seems sort of friendly towards the Olivia de Havilland character, even he, prior to the gang coming in, he's come in and nicked a few things from the house, and I think that sets that's a nice layer to the movie early on. That's telling you, oh, there's this potential comic relief character, but don't trust him. He's evil. He's going to steal stuff, and I think that lays the ground beautifully for what comes next. And just sort of sets the tone again for, okay, this film isn't going to progress well and it isn't going to end well.
Well, if you think about, Chaplin, Chaplin obviously made a career out of The Tramp, which became
Yeah.
this awesome symbol for what was happening in America at the time, and the split, the divisions, there's sort of inequality. But you were going to get that kind of the comedy as well, even though he was very strong on social commentary, is very left thinking. But here,
and as such, we're on his side, and I think Lady in a Cage marks a shift from that. It sets up the type of characters you might get in a Chaplin movie. I think that's a really good comparison, Andy. But it then says, we're doing something different, guys. You ain't going to like anyone in this film. You're not going to go home cheering anyone on.
Well, it's the fact that you start with we start with Olivia de Havilland, and she's not a great character. She's not good, as we've already just demonstrated. She's morally bankrupt in many ways, and worse than that, it's not about her. It's she's kind of one of those ladies of a certain age who have a certain amount of income, and probably lets or did when he was still, let her husband do the voting and let her husband do the sort of political thinking, not interested, not wanting to take part in society, but is absolutely there to judge everybody in society. But to her standards. But also and then we get Brady comes in, and so we have that element, and we're wondering, okay, so she's stuck in a cage, so we get someone coming in, he doesn't seem that bad, but obviously he's clearly stealing stuff, and at every point from there it just gets worse. There's someone else always worse, and it's the fact that no, we don't necessarily feel for the characters because they're not presented as, that's not the point. It is a horror show, but it's also, you've got like Sadie comes in there, and it's the level of kind of the lack of self-respect that any of the characters have as well. She comes in and she just says, for the first, I think she introduces to one of Caan's gang. Well, I'm sort of a tramp. It's just like, who introduces themselves as that? How little have you got that's your introduction? That's who I am.
I know, it's almost like she's auditioning to try and get in the gang. Where's my mask? I think there's an interesting thing about Olivia's character, Cornelia, in that she I referred to her as disabled earlier on. She actually isn't, of course. She's recovering from a break. And again, what does that tell you about her? Because the reason that I'm sure the word disabled sort of came to mind is she acts like a disabled person. She's almost like, okay, I've got this temporary sort of problem, but I'm going to act all entitled about it. And of course, the cage of the title has been installed. It's not something that's there in the property as a means of helping a sort of long-term disabled person. She's rich enough to have had that put in, and then suddenly that goes wrong. And again, the metaphor sort of extends there. I think the fact we'd be more sympathetic for her if she were a sort of long-term disabled person. But even then, I think Olivia might well have played that as a bastard. I think she'd have used her disability as a means of hating the world and hating everyone around her. I think it makes it even worse, the fact that she's not got a long-term health problem, that she's recovering, but she's behaving as though the world owes her something. She's got this cage installed, this elevator between floors, because she can afford to have that put in. And again, every little detail of this film sort of stresses that conflict between the character, and it stresses the sort of strata of American society and of world society. I really do think there's a very, very strong sort of social, or as I say, small p political message going on here, in the guise of something that's basically Last House on the Left. And again, in Craven's movie, how many sympathetic characters are there? I'd say a big fat zero.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are. I mean, we can see this film and see the protagonist as being a kind of a metaphor, if you like, a symbol. And that is the case. But in term, so we could say, oh, it's slightly exaggerated. It's not really, because I mean, there's plenty of studies and there's lots of experiments and credited experiments where there was one famous experiment where they did it on a number of people, well, hundreds of people. And they checked this experiment where they would get two players to play Monopoly, and they would set the game up to be rigged so that one person would get, every time they pass go, they got $400 instead of two, and the other person would get the normal amount, but the other person would also they could only shake one die, and the other person's got two. So there was all the game is completely rigged.
So you're playing Monopoly with Donald Trump, basically, then.
Yeah, but the game is completely rigged. Both players know it's rigged, yet the longer the game goes on, the person who has the advantage starts to behave in certain ways that they immediately become, despite what background they actually came from, within that game, they become very quickly, they become entitled.
Yeah.
And they start to see themselves as a better player, even though it's been explained to them that they've got these advantages. And so you see these kind of film clips, and there are kind of bowls of chips on the table. They are helping themselves to much more chips than the other player. It's a really interesting experiment.
Yeah,
and
of course
this is reality.
You then get the mass version of that, which was the Stanford experiment a few years later, some years after this movie, even, where two groups of people were divided up, and they were sort of told, right, you're the jailers, you're the prisoners, and then again, almost immediately, something triggers in the brain, and you think, right, I'm in charge now. And there's obviously something, it's horrible to admit this, but there's obviously something in the human brain that responds to that. Yeah.
Well, it's like the other one's the Milgram experiment, isn't it, with the electric shocks? I mean,
turning up the switch to the max.
If you want to erode any faith you had in humanity, then watch the footage from those experiments. The Milgram experiments.
Absolutely.
Terrible.
I mean, to the point where the Stanford experiment has been made. That's on screen as a documentary about the genuine thing,
it is,
but has since been dramatized as well. And you watch that as a dramatized film with actors in it, and you're watching it thinking, especially people who don't know anything about it must be thinking, surely this can't be based on a true story, but it is. And it's an interesting point that there's clearly something ingrained in the human mind. And it is back to this thing we've already talked about, of give people a little bit of power, and there's something in the brain that says, right, you've got some power, demand more. You're entitled to more power. And it's at its very, very worst, I think, as I've already said, in British office middle management.
It's you just see different levels of that in the film, and that's the interest. You've got Olivia de Havilland, who we imagine has inherited this money. So it's not really
Yeah,
her.
yeah,
She's done nothing
yeah.
to earn it.
Sure, sure.
And then Sadie comes in with Brady, and Sadie's kind of already spending the money in her head. It's not hers,
Yeah,
but she
yeah.
hasn't even got her paws on it, and she's already kind of spending it in
Oh
her
yeah,
head. Then
yeah,
this gang
yeah,
comes along, and
yeah.
then even worse than that, we've got this pawnbroker
Yeah,
guy comes in.
the gang are interesting because they've got a hierarchy. There's a boss, you know. James Caan's the leader. They're not a democracy, are they? They're not a collective. He's telling them what to do. He's sort of pushing things along.
Well,
And
he's kind of, you get the feeling as well that he is, whereas his two sidekicks, they kind of have this kind of nihilism, but at the end of the day, they're still working sort of within reasonable human terms
yeah,
you know
yeah,
they
they're
adhere
in
to
this.
greed and
Yeah,
things like that. Whereas
they're in this for
Khan,
kicks, aren't they? Yeah, yeah,
but Khan is kind of like, I don't think he's interested. He's taking what's in the house because he can. I don't think
yeah,
he's,
yeah,
because he says at one point to Elaine, you know, Elaine says, "Oh, it's $10,000," and he says, "What are you going to do with real money?" And
yeah,
she's
yeah.
got no
I
answer.
think
What would she do?
yeah, yeah.
She'd be dead in a week.
The difference with him and the other gang members is they would happily go and smash up anybody's property. I think he's really getting something out of getting into this rich lady's place. You know, it means something to him that
Yeah.
that's the place they've invaded.
Yeah, I mean it's completely wrong-headed, but it is there. You do get the feeling at some level it's completely been distorted out of all shape and is meaningless. But there is some level of, he has got a kind of chip on his shoulder. He has kind of, you know, I am, you know, he's kind of laughing at, you know, you think I'm an animal, but actually I'm in charge now.
Yeah,
This is the one time
yeah,
in your life I get to be in charge. And you can kind of sort of sympathize for a minute, but you can't actually empathize with this character fully because he's such a bastard, and you know, he's not representative of anything class or culture really. He's just a live wire, you know, that's gone wrong.
yeah, yeah. Now, I think we should talk about the violence in the film because, as we've
Oh
already
yeah, yeah,
said, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
we're in a situation where the previous year has seen Blood Feast emerge on American screens and people's tongues being pulled out and all of that. You know, people being hacked up in front of Herschel Gordon Lewis's camera. But here, this is a Paramount picture that must be more violent than any other mainstream American studio picture up to that point. And without giving away any spoilers, I think what we can sort of say is that the gang, for all of their violent acts throughout the movie, as it turns out, they don't commit the most violent act in the picture, and I think that's important to stress that. But what did watching this film again yourself, Andy? What did you think about the level of violence in it when you compare it to what else was around in American cinema?
Oh, I think there's a shot pretty much right at the end of the film, which is what I'd forgotten, and it is. I mean, yeah, it's pretty
I
in your
think
face,
it's
and
beyond.
I was kind of like, was this caught? I mean, I just, you know, and obviously
Yeah.
it was banned in, you refused
Well,
to
it was
see
banned
it in
over
this
here.
country,
Yeah.
but I just think, well, there must have been versions of this film that went out in the States, depending on which kind of part of the country where that would have been cut, I'm sure.
I would imagine so. That's not going to play very well in Utah, is it? You know, and then the sort of the Midwestern states. But you know, Californian audiences would have been all over it. They'd have been saying, "Yeah, it's like that here," you know. Yeah, incredibly violent at times. But I think there's also this undercurrent of unnerving violence as well. What the gang do is frightening enough. But what they threaten to do, the threat they pose, what they stand for, is always there throughout the film, and it's always simmering away, you know. And I think that is as disturbing as any actual depictions of violence. And but again, it's done in a new way. You've never quite seen that level of likely to boil over simmering violence in an American movie before. Even film noir didn't quite get there, you know. And suddenly there's this new breed of film coming, And I think this is a good early example of it, where you as an audience member, you're shocked and disturbed by the violent acts that you see. But when people do this, the old argument that oh, the unseen is more terrifying than the seen, I think this movie has its cake and eats it. You know, it gives us unseen violence or threatened violence that is really, really, really terrifying, and a step up, a few notches up from what we've seen before. And then it gives you the in your face violence, and it gets the best of both worlds.
Well, it certainly does. So I think on that note, we're running out of time, unfortunately. I could talk about this all day, but we're running
Oh,
out of
yeah.
time, unfortunately. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much again, Darrell. You should come, we need to come back and do a 70s
Well,
film.
70s. I'm thinking up what 70s movies we could do, and maybe looking for something like this, you know. But yeah, I'd love to come back in due course and head for the decade that taste forgot. Yeah.
So remember to call round next time. Make yourself at home. You look like you're dying for a nice cup of tea for terror.
And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future.